We live in weird times. Just following the political brouhaha that's going on today. I don't know if any of you feel good about that. It is more comical. It is very, very strange. And it looks like American society is tearing itself apart. And for a variety of reasons, people don't like other sides. What worries me the most as a college professor and an educator for all my life is that what we talk about when we talk about the truth seems to be fluid. People decide based on who they are and what their background is what the truth is. They don't want to know the real truth. They want to know just their truth, and they want to live with their truth. For instance, as you know, I mean, we've had the birthers talking about Obama. I mean, does it matter that they produced a birth certificate? People still don't believe it because their truth does not allow them to admit that they're wrong. And this is not a phenomenon that's new to the United States. This is one, in fact, that's been part and parcel of our history. But there's nothing quite like what we're going through except looking back about 100 years to France in the 1890s, in the early 1900s. France was one of the great European powers. It was the center of Western civilization. They call it the Belle Epoque. If you know anything about the literature of the period and the arts, the French Impressionists, it was a time of change. It was a time of the Fifth Republic. 100 years before that had been the French Revolution. The French Revolution had torn apart the old society and created a new one. But in the end, then that republic was betrayed and the monarchies came back. And so after several different monarchical attempts, the new republic was established in 1870, especially after being defeated by the Germans or the Prussians. And so we're talking about a country that is very sensitive about its position in the world. Sound familiar? We're one that can't make the world act the way it wants to, yet it's still the center of culture and civilization. It's still an exciting place to live. I mean, with the Cézanne, Monet, Victor Hugo, all kinds of, and of course Emile Zola, who's kind of the focus for today. And this is our chat theme this year is the life of books. And Zola is one of the most famous writers you've probably never heard of before. Nominated twice for the Nobel Prize for Literature, and considered one of the greats in French literary history. So today we're going to talk about one of his most famous moments, which was not a book, but a newspaper, in which he decided to put his reputation on the line and protect the individual rights of one person and accuse the government and the army and even the French Catholic Church of betraying those principles that had made France great. So it's called Jaccuse, or I accuse. And so to do that, we have to get into the story of the Dreyfus affair. And of course, we'll take a look at the end of this of what happened because of this, and then how much truth do we have today in our own society. Now, the French Republic, while it looked big and looked powerful, was having many serious problems. And among these were the fact that the monarchists hadn't all gone away. There had been 3 separate monarchies during the 19th century. None of them worked out very well. The last one having been captured by the Prussians completely in the Franco-Prussian War. And so when your country is down, then people look to institutions to solve their identity things. And we've often seen that in this country, where people look to the army or the military as they're all heroes. I remember I once got in trouble by saying, well, not everybody in the military is a hero. I mean, there are people who do heroic things. Just because you're in the military doesn't make you a hero. Well, that could have gotten me thrown in jail in France. But it also got me a number of people who were unhappy about my saying that. Because frankly, there's good and bad people in every profession. And in this case, the army became the focus for the French because they had lost this war. And so they were looking for a way to bring back, restore the honor and the glory of La Belle France. So much so that the military actually tried to take over the government. They were so unhappy about the French Republic that the General Boulanger, which you see right there, actually tried as a coup to take over the government. He failed. He went off to England, and there, I guess, he committed suicide on the grave of his lover. Very French, right? So, but in the end, it turned out to be an attempt to overturn the Republic. There were a lot of people in the army who were Catholic, The French Revolution 100 years before had attacked the Catholic Church and the traditional values of society. The Republic stood for new values, and many of them hated that for that reason. They hated the idea of new people and new values. They hated groups of people that hadn't made it in French society before, like Jews had risen, and because of their talents and so on, that they had risen in society. In the old Catholic French society, there was no place for them. You had to be of the right families. You had to be, you had to have gone to the right schools, and if you didn't get anywhere. But the new republic was offering opportunities for at least this one minority group to become part of society. We see continuing stress in our society and other Western cultures today about the role of minorities. It's one that we can't ignore. We've not solved all the problems of this country about that yet. Just when you hear presidential candidates talking about putting patrols in Muslim neighborhoods or building a wall on our southern border, neither of these solve problems. They simply make people feel better about their particular view of the problem. Many felt that their values were under siege. The new art forms were shocking and brutal to them. They didn't like the new writing. They didn't like the French Impressionism. They could have called it ugly. They wanted realistic paintings because that's what they were used to. Realistic music. Music was changing, art was changing, literature was changing. And change is always difficult for people. So France itself, as I mentioned, had been under several humiliations. Even though they were this great, powerful country with an empire and with colonies in all different parts of the world, they had lost to the Prussians in 1871. Prussia then declared itself the Empire of Germany, the German Empire, the Second Reich, as it was called also, and took 2 provinces away from France. There was the Panama crisis, where the French, who had built the Suez Canal, and then the British had bought it out underneath them without them knowing about it. And then they built the Panama Canal, and the company went bankrupt, and millions of Frenchmen lost money. There was also a Catholic bank that had collapsed, and they were sure the Jews were behind that, other than the fact that they really didn't know what they were doing. And then finally, there was the Fashoda crisis, where the French were attempting to establish a greater colonies in Africa, and they came into territories that the British wanted, and the British chased them out. And that was, again, a national humiliation, all at about the same time. Now our story focuses on Alfred Dreyfus. He was a French army captain of artillery. He's one of these new people who never would have been part of the military before. He was an Alsatian, so he came from Alsace-Lorraine, which we'll get to in just a second. And he was Jewish, of course. He and his family, when Alsace-Lorraine had been taken over by Germany in 1871, they moved to France. And he was a fairly effective officer. He was smart, he was hardworking, and he was rising up so fast that he was posted to the general staff. And he was also independently wealthy. His father had been a peddler, a poor peasant peddler selling things sort of door to door to people. And so he really didn't have to work, but he was very, very devoted to France, as most Alsatians were, actually. France, as I said, was still traumatized by the loss of Alsace-Lorraine in 1871. In many of the same ways that we are, in a sense, still obsessed with things from the Vietnam War, not winning the Vietnam War, not winning in Iraq or Afghanistan, and looking for ways to sort of show American manhood. We have a lot of politicians wanting to bomb people and attack people now. It's sort of sad. But that's the attitude France had at that time, 100 years ago. The French people not only didn't like Jews because they were new, they also didn't like Alsatians because Alsatians looked and sounded German. They grew up with German as their first language, and even today in Alsace, which is back part of France now, they love their sausages, they love their beer and their sauerkraut, and but they're more French than the French in their loyalties because they were tossed back and forth like a football. It's that blue section of the German Empire that you see there on the map was the part that they took from France. And by the way, they took it from France in 1871. France took it back after World War I. When the Nazis defeated Germany in the Nazis defeated France in World War II, the Germans took it back, and at the end of World War II, France took it back. So it's like a ping pong ball, back and forth and back and forth. Dreyfus, of course, almost had 2 strikes against him because he was Alsatian, spoke French with a German accent, and he was, Was he really loyal to France because his family had come from Alsace? And secondly, as a Jew, was he loyal to France as well? So these were questions. Alsace-Lorraine here is depicted in a couple of the things as two French maidens tied to a German post in that one picture. And then there was also, from the era that we're talking about, they had the two maidens there who have been lost to Germany in the statue in the bottom right there, which was part of the focus on this. France was focusing on this, and they wanted it back. They were planning to get revenge. The problem where Dreyfus got into trouble was that there apparently was some spy on the French general staff who was giving information to the Germans. And they knew about it because a maid at the German embassy was in the French intelligence service and was going through all of their garbage and found a note. And the French were especially worried about their new French 75mm cannon, which you see there, which would play a major role in World War I. Lightweight, very easy to use, very effective at short and long range. And the French were building this up, getting ready for revenge to get Alsace-Lorraine back. They were planning, when the war came, they were excited to go to war in World War I because they were going to get their territory back. This is the actual evidence. It was called the bordereau. It was found, as I said, in a waste paper basket. The handwriting experts, which was, by the way, a brand new science, and anybody who could claim to be an expert, let's put it that way. At the time, they looked at it and said, well, who can this be? And they went through and they started looking at people on the general staff, and they thought it might be Dreyfus, because after all, he was a Jew, so he might be ready to betray everybody. And when they looked at it and found that they called him into a room, they had him write something on a piece of paper, and then they arrested him. And but his handwriting didn't match, so they actually accused him of falsifying his handwriting. Makes no sense, but when your truth says that Jews are guilty, then you can make up any stuff, like our presidential candidates. You can make up any stuff you want to excuse the fact that you don't have any facts that line up. So, and by the way, the belief that he was guilty didn't disappear until almost 20 years ago. These are the two of the main, you don't need to know these folks, of course, but they're the ones who falsified the evidence. They didn't like Jews, they didn't like anybody who wasn't Catholic. The one on the left, actually, he'll come back to our story, but they believed that they were doing what should have been done, even though that there was no actual evidence that they were true patriots, and so we're going to stand up for what's right, even though the truth is absolutely, there's nothing on their own. So we weren't bothered by their lies. It just kept going on and on and on. The lies got bigger and bigger. Dreyfus was, as he was a Jew in Alsatian, again, he had 2 strikes against him. He denied all the charges. He kept saying he was loyal to France, but the way he talked was in court, where he was because of his personality, he wasn't excitable, and they said, oh, he must be hiding something. So they were then using their so-called powers of observation to make a generalization about somebody that had, again, nothing to do with the truth. And again, we use things like that today. There was secret evidence, which his attorney never had a chance to see. And so he was convicted and given life imprisonment. There were many people in France that were sure he should have been executed. They had just gotten rid of the death penalty. And somebody actually tried to bring it back just so they could execute him. And everybody would feel better. He was brought out to a public square where the military typically did all of its honors and gave its medals. The public was invited, and many French government officials and members of the artistic community and celebrities all came out, and they got to watch him having his epaulets ripped off of his shoulders, his buttons pulled off, his sword broken, as you see in this picture, publicly disgraced, and then carted off and sent off to prison. The nation, of course, was almost universally convinced that he was guilty, both right and left. The right didn't like him because he was Jewish. He was one of the new men, again, possible Alsatian. But the left didn't like him either because as a socialist, who were one of the new political parties of that time fighting for the rights of workers, he was just another rich Jew as far as they were concerned. So they didn't stand up for him either, at least not at this point. So sometimes we think, well, who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? Well, at the beginning of the Dreyfus crisis, of the affair, everybody was on the bad side, generally. Because people weren't willing to stand up and defend him because he was doing what they believed he was doing. In other words, he was a natural traitor. So this was an anti-Semitic journal published a number of these things which have been used in museum exhibits over the years on this. And you don't have to have me translate what it says in French there. So, but everybody disliked Jews at the point. So Dreyfus was sent to South America, to French Guiana, thousands of miles away, and put on Devil's Island. How many of you have heard of Devil's Island before? You ever see the movie Papillon? That shows you what it's like. Dreyfus was the only one there when he was there. And that's the little house where he stayed. They put him in this room, and of course the picture on the left is how the people who didn't like him perceived what he was doing just sitting around. He was just sitting around. His mail was intercepted. It was all read. Oftentimes he didn't get everything that was sent to him. They were worried that he might escape, and in fact, a British newspaper published in 1896 that he might just escape, and so they decided to make sure that he didn't. So they built that wall that you see around the house, so there was no sunlight coming in. There's no lights inside the room. There's no air conditioning. You're in the tropics. He was chained, manacled to his bed. He wore a manacle all the time. He had to sleep with the manacles on, so he developed sores. There was insects that were eating him. This is tropical South America. He was very, very ill from the food that he ate. He lost all of his teeth. His health dramatically impacted by all this. He kept insisting that he was innocent, but he was doing it in a dignified way. But they treated him like they should have killed him, and they were treating him as if he was a non-person, really. It's well, again, one of these travesties of justice. It's like they put him off on the moon. There was no way, in fact, he could get away from there. Although the movie Papillon, they do escape. Part of what the affair did, in a bigger sense, was that it triggered something that was always there, and that was anti-Semitism. Hitler did not invent anti-Semitism. He merely played on it. During World War I, the Jews served in the German army and were accepted. But in World War II, obviously things changed. In France, although France became the first country in Europe to give Jews the right to vote and participate completely in society, as I said, there were many people who were unhappy about that. And all it took was the beginning of this affair for the ugliness to come out. And it came out. It's like the things that we hear nowadays with people talking about Muslims or Mexicans. Don't have to tell you about that. The ugliness is there. It just needs some little spark to get it to come out. Everybody assumed that he was guilty. He must be because he's a Jew. So, again, they felt good because they knew that Jews can't be trusted. Again, Jews were blamed for all the economic problems of the country. This is a caricature of Baron Rothschild, again, who was accused of destroying good French Catholic institutions so that the Jews could take over the world. I remember once when I was in Mexico, the family I was staying with when I was learning Spanish said, well, we're not prejudiced like you Americans, they said. But they said, but you still have to watch out for the Jews because they own everything. Being a good guest, I didn't say anything. But I've used it as an example for years, that they're prejudiced people everywhere. Nice people, too. And of course, the other one shows the German behind all of this, so the enemy, the immigrant or the new person as a symbol of the enemy. You can't trust them. Now we come to the story that becomes kind of interesting. Major Picard was another anti-Semitic member of the military. And he took over the military intelligence bureau, and just to sort of make sure that all the records are right, he started looking at the evidence in the case. And guess what? The false evidence, the lies, the innuendo, the fact that what they claimed to be true didn't match up. He went to his superiors, and they said, be quiet. Who cares about that one Jew, basically, is what they said. But he kept saying, that's not right. This is not what the military is all about. We're supposed to be standing for something. So they decided to get rid of him, and they shipped him off to North Africa, one of the French colonies of Tunisia, and they put him on an inspection tour, basically, to go and disappear for many months. Before he left, he mentioned some of his concerns to a French politician that he knew. He would later go to jail for that. He's not supposed to have revealed anything, but he was worried that he would not be allowed to come back because the army was doing everything it could to cover everything up. Meanwhile, Dreyfus's brother, Matthew Dreyfus, who was an industrialist, and people, you know, who had invested in France's industrial revolution and helped create factories and jobs and so on, he began saying, well, my brother is innocent. He would never have done this. And so he began to agitate for this. And he contacted Picard eventually, and others began to look at what evidence there actually was. The original evidence was eventually published because they couldn't hide it forever. And everybody looked at it and said, none of this makes any sense. And so they began to think, well, maybe whose handwriting does this look like? And they looked at it again, and it turned out there was, in fact, another person on the general staff whose handwriting, it matched exactly. In fact, people who knew this person, immediately when it was the bordereau was published in the paper, they said, I know who that belongs to. It belongs to Major Esterhazy, who was a descendant of a Hungarian immigrant to France, he had all of the things that somebody who needs money did. He was in gambling debt, he had mistresses, he was always short of money. Dreyfus, of course, remember, is independently wealthy. There's no reason for him to take money and betray France. Whereas Esterhazy was known to be shopping around looking for people to pay for his bills and stuff. Many other members in the army heard about this in the leadership, but they just didn't want to know. Don't tell me. I don't want to know. I don't care. Let's make this whole thing just go away. And so they tried to prevent Esterhazy from being brought to trial. But in the end, it got out in the public, and they began demanding things about it. Here's Matthew Dreyfus being burned in effigy with the red windmill at the background. Does anybody know what that refers to? At this time in France, the Moulin Rouge. This is the place where the great nightclub, the world's most famous first nightclub, where people hung out, and all those can-can dancers lifted their skirts and danced, which was terribly shocking for the time. What would they think today if they saw what's on regular TV? But, and here, of course, we have shown the people wearing robes. These are meant to be Catholic priests. Priests also were unhappy about the rise of Jews. They were also unhappy about the change of society. Priests traditionally provided all education. Primary education was religious, and it was Catholic. So, and most of the institutions, including the military academy, was also associated with the Catholic Church. So they show them, in fact, egging this crowd on. Here is Major Esterhazy. He's the real traitor. And look at that look. I know, well, great mustache. I couldn't get mine to do that. He eventually was brought to trial, but again, the army did everything it could to protect him, even though they knew he was guilty. They didn't care. We can't have the army's honor besmirched. We've seen things like this with things, if those of you aren't old enough to remember My Lai, the massacre in Vietnam by U.S. Army unit, but they decided to only just pick on one person and put one person on trial. And then he was given basically a slap on the hand. And they not really made to pay for the things that actually happened. So the army didn't want to own up to its mistakes. So they put him on trial, and they acquitted him within 2 days. Literally, this is for a major court-martial and trial with evidence that he has done all of this. It was a show trial, basically to say, look, we've done it, but he's innocent. And of course, his proof was to those who knew, of course, that all the Jews were behind everything. And so he was a hero for them. Here's a guy who's an actual traitor being treated as a hero. And eventually, he didn't like the publicity, his guilty conscience. He left for England, which is just across the French, the English Channel. It's only 20 miles away. And there, of course, he could be safe, and he later admitted his guilt. So the army and everybody protected him, though, which was too bad. Then, since it looked like there might be a sense that Dreyfus might be given a second chance, then the army began to forge new documents. This is called the Faux Henri, or the Faux Henry. And he took a couple of pieces of paper with different handwriting and sort of glued it all together. and then he wrote it out himself to make sure that there was enough incriminating evidence at the bottom so that everybody knew that it was Dreyfus was actually named in this one. Before in the bordereau, it was only the letter D was in there, so that must be Dreyfus, right? There's only one person with the letter D in his name. But then, of course, during the Major Henri made this possible. And again, the people who in the know realized this was clumsy. It was pretty clear that there were different handwriting samples going on here. But Henri in the previous trial, I just said he knew for sure that Dreyfus was guilty, so that's why he was doing this. Now you would think if somebody fakes evidence that would be, pretty obvious, and this was pretty obvious. But that didn't make any difference to people. He was eventually found out. He was arrested and imprisoned. He admitted his guilt. He cut his throat in prison with a razor. That's what the razor refers to there. But to the anti-Dreyfusards, the people who were against Dreyfus and didn't want the trial reopened, he was a hero who had again been hounded by the Jews. And so he became a martyr to their cause. It doesn't matter what the truth is. We'll just keep believing what we believe. And darn it, we better start patrolling those neighborhoods. Now, we come to the story of Emile Zola. And in many ways, the focus, when I thought about this, about the life of books and Zola's efforts here, again, one of France's most famous authors, a lifelong friend with Cézanne, the artist, celebrity in his own time. He was already made enough money from publishing that he lived in a mansion, well known in all the French circles of honor and so on, winning the equivalent of the Academy Award and those sorts of things. Everybody looked up to him. He, like most Frenchmen, believed Dreyfus was guilty at the beginning, until people asked him to take a look at this. And he started to look at some of the stuff as the evidence began slipping out into the newspapers. He wrote several letters, public letters, to try to get people to reopen the case. But eventually, before we go to what he eventually did, let's look a little bit at, these were some of the books that he was well known for. His style of writing at the time was called Naturalism, or theatrical naturalism, and this was part of a new movement of realism. Instead of talking about, only things about good people and heroes and heroines who do the right thing and do this, they're writing about real people with real problems. And so a lot of his stories are about prostitutes and people on drugs and life down in the lower parts of society. And many people were unhappy about this. As far as they were concerned, this was garbage. And why should we read about this? And we should be reading about things where people are happy and good people are rewarded and bad people go to hell and all that sort of stuff. So naturalism talked about realism, but it also tried to scientifically explain what were the causes for all of these things. Things like poverty, things like race hatred, things like discrimination. And nobody wanted to know about that stuff because, again, remember, they've all made up their minds already. So I encourage you to look at this. I read Germinal, the one in the lower left, when I was in school, and I've seen Nana performed on PBS many years ago. So that's the only experience I have with these. Have you ever used them in class? No? Different time, different place. So finally, on the 13th of January, 1898, Zola publishes Jaccuse, I Accuse. And he's actually considered a great literary hero as well as political hero for doing this. And is considered now a great patriot in France. But at the time, this was not popular because nobody wanted to hear that the government, the military, and even the Catholic Church were basically preventing justice from occurring, taking a slight Jewish captain and blaming him for things that he didn't do just so to protect their own place in society. And he his L'Aurore, or the Dawn, basically, was a paper that was prepared by Georges Clemenceau, who was later to be the premier of France during World War I. He was a socialist agitator at the time, and Zola basically bought out the entire issue and printed up thousands of copies of this and distributed it all over France. So and here's a comedy magazine sort of making fun of him writing this, but almost everybody heard about this. It's kind of the equivalent of being on TV, where everybody would have seen this at one place or another. And if you didn't see it, at least you heard about it. You wanted to find out what was going on. And in Jaccuse, this is what he accused the army of, the things that they were doing: lying, falsifying, and knowingly using falsified evidence. He accused the handwriting experts of incompetence and lying on the stand. He accuses the government of covering up and protecting the real traitor. And of course, he accuses the generals of Catholic bigotry against Jews. He raises the word anti-Semitism, and at a time when people didn't want to say that word out loud, although the deeds that they were doing and the cartoons they were publishing demonstrated that it was alive and well. This visual that I have here it just struck me, because here it is. He's pointing at the army, the government, and the Catholic Church, are the three people represented there. So, at the time. And of course, what do they have at the bottom is blood rather than just, because Dreyfus was suffering and other people were being treated badly. The army didn't worry about it initially. They thought they had everything under control, that Dreyfus was away, people were upset. The president of France at this time was saying, there is no Dreyfus affair. Just denying that there was anything going on, denying the government culpability in this. What Zola's genius for this is that he didn't just do this himself, but he marshaled groups of people together that had never really been public advocates. We're used today to seeing actors and artists and directors and filmmakers and college professors and so on rally around ideas that are of value to us. During this affair, people kind of made fun of them and called them intellectuals. And guess what? That was when the term was first used. It was during the Dreyfus affair. But the intellectuals who had been so sure that Jews deserved their fate, whatever it was, suddenly began to think about, there are other things in society that are more important than just punishing somebody who might just be innocent. Of course, we knew he was guilty, but he might just be innocent. And they began to say, if there's false evidence, we don't want a country that does this. We don't want a country that lies to us. And we see that, whether it's an actor or actress going on TV, making a spot today for Save the Children or the World Wildlife Federation or something like that, or people standing up for progressive political candidates and standing with them because of the change that they can occur. It's really the Dreyfus affair that begins this use of celebrity and also the use of newspapers in a big way as a major force to transform society. So Jaccuse is more than just a simple incident. It's the beginning of much of the world that we have today in terms of the influence of media and media superstars. And nobody realized that media superstars might become president someday too. What was the reaction? Well, if you were one of the traditionalists, this is what it is. And if you can't see it, he's spreading, says, caca international all over the map of France. And caca, of course, if you know your Spanish, I don't have to explain that one to you. He's a pig. He's wallowing he's sitting on his books there, which of course they considered to be filth because they didn't have the same values that they did. They were degenerate purveyors. He himself was accused of libeling the army. You were not allowed to libel, you were not allowed to call the army liars. In many ways, even today, the military gets away with things that we don't want to talk about. Has anybody been put on trial for torture? Torturing Al-Qaeda suspects? Anybody know anything about that? I guess some institutions are too important. We can't really put our own selves on trial, can we? And he also accused the handwriting experts of lying on the stage. Guess what? So they sued him for libel too. You're destroying my reputation as a handwriting expert. And of course, because of all the fuss, he was actually brought to trial. The picture at the bottom shows Zola against the mob. In other words, the people are against him because they didn't want to be reminded that their institutions might be corrupt. They wanted to keep believing in the myth that the army stood for the soul of France. And so that's Zola's, by the way, his mugshot up above when he was arrested. And so he went to trial and was found guilty. Then he eventually was retried and found guilty again. So what did he do? He, just like Esther Hazy, his friends advised him, don't stick around, so he crossed the channel and lived in England. And was there until just after there was an amnesty that was given for everybody involved. The Dreyfus affair consumed French society, so much so they even created a board game to talk about all I'm only giving you the light version of this. There's too many people, too many contexts. You may think I'm boring you to tears, but just start reading all of the detail. It's like digging in the mud. It just gets worse and worse and worse. At the end, in the very center there's truth coming out of the well that it's been hidden in. That was the way that they often portrayed that eventually truth will win out. Vérité in French, truth, at the center. And the kingdom of the Jew, they call it. Here's again, it's the military, another cartoon. This was done, I believe, in England. The military trying to keep the truth from coming out of the well. And they're not being very effective, but because it kept trickling out. This was a popular cartoon of the day showing those who wanted to reopen the case. They were called the Dreyfusards, those who supported Dreyfus. And then the anti-Dreyfus, those who were against it. And the first one says, at the top, it says, let's agree not to talk about Dreyfus in the family dinner. And then the bottom says, they talked. So they're all punching each other. French society was going nuts over this. And again, you were so tied up with your identity and your beliefs that they weren't willing to even consider, in this case, it's an exaggeration, of course, but family members. I have family members who we had to have Easter saying no politics. No politics. So, that was my brother, so anyway. He's still got to dig in, but I avoided response to that. Eventually, though, the stuff was so bad that somebody had to respond to it. And the secret was when a new government came in that decided they wanted to clean house. They were worried about a number of things. And this slide may be out of order because of that. But Dreyfus was returned to France for a second trial. They threw out the first trial, said the evidence was tainted, let's do a second court-martial. And so he was brought back, and it shows him greeting his wife, and the postcard that they made out of this in the upper left there, and then on a train with a military guard. The other countries, of course, had a field day with this. Queen Victoria sent over the Attorney General of Great Britain to investigate the case, and she and many others were agitating for Dreyfus's rehabilitation and retrial. And this is a German cartoon showing the military house of cards beginning to collapse. There's another famous one of an Italian one that has the French army on top of an engine that they're trying to work and it's about to explode. This is a British one here that shows Uncle Sam and John Bull, the representative of Great Britain, both in the lower left-hand corner, smiling at the French, who are all going to wind up in jail, essentially, in the stocks for all their crimes. Because remember, they're all competitors. And so this is one of the earliest times. This is with Paris in the background. The international pressures caused France to look at this again. France was really embarrassed by this. Remember, the government was trying to sweep it under the surface, and the Paris Exposition Universelle was the next year. It was like a World's Fair, and they were going to show off how advanced they were and so on, and all the art nouveau that was the style of the time. And the Paris subway is actually a survivor from this exposition. The Eiffel Tower was a survivor from a previous exposition, which everybody had said was so ugly it should be gotten rid of, but obviously it's still there. And so the government wanted the affair to go away. They didn't want people coming and asking questions. So eventually they did have the second trial, and Dreyfus, as I said, was brought back. The trial was in August 1899 in the town of Rennes. They kept it out of Paris this time. They want to keep it quiet. And there was an assassination attempt by one of the anti-Dreyfusards to kill one of the defense attorneys. Didn't work, but it was pretty close. A new government eventually led to this, and the military court again found Dreyfus guilty. Again, there's no evidence, but they just decided, well, we got to keep. The military was given a chance, and they said, well, he must be guilty because General Mercier, the top general, says he's guilty, so we're all going to vote him guilty. You know, the military is not free thinkers, let's put it that way. So, but this time the court, under the pressure to hide things, he was found guilty with, as they said, extenuating circumstances, which is very strange, because he wasn't going to be sent back to Devil's Island. I mean, his health was already broken. He was not the man he had been there, who had been there for years. So he was offered a pardon, and he accepted it. When you accept a pardon, you sort of guilty. And many other Dreyfusards were upset. To them, he had betrayed their cause because he had become a cause to them, a famous cause that they were fighting for. And here was this guy, he turned out to be very human. He just wanted to get back together with his family. He realized his military career might be over. But he took the pardon. And so Zola comes back from England, and Zola dies of carbon monoxide asphyxiation. This within 2 years after Dreyfus's exoneration. And it's a picture of him there. He could have been assassinated. People were still mad at him. The military was still mad at him. Later on, but as he died, then he suddenly became the hero of France again, and they put his ashes in. There's a famous monument for him. Eventually, another new government came along and decided to put the military tribunals under the civilian government control and not let the military make up stuff. And so they reviewed the case. They found all the evidence to be less than acceptable. And so in 1906, they declared that Dreyfus was innocent of all charges. And this anti-Dreyfus cartoon here shows, it says Jewish Christmas. Basically, they're getting this reward for having survived all of this and getting this present from the government. But they still considered him guilty. He's got the scales of justice in his hand. On the other hand, they also declared a general amnesty for everybody involved in the case, which sounds like a great idea, but the people who committed the crimes, including the army, they don't have to pay. Nobody paid for lying. Dreyfus paid for the years that he spent on Devil's Island, hell on earth. But the military didn't face any of the charges or face any of the conditions. Dreyfus was exonerated. He was actually restored to the army after this. He was given a promotion to major, and he was given France's highest honor for bravery, the Legion of Honor. And the cartoon on the left shows him getting so many medals he could barely stand up. Again, they didn't believe that he deserved it. He's the person with the sword in the foreground in the picture. Again, that's the same place where he was dishonored. They restored him to his honor and gave him the awards for basically suffering on behalf of the army, as they described it, and the nation. Theodor Herzl, how does he come into the story? Herzl was living in France at the time, and he was appalled by the anti-Jewish frenzy of the anti-Dreyfusards and the attacks and the things. So he decided that there was no place in France for Jews, so he began to think about going to Palestine. And the World Zionist movement began at this point to think about getting land inside the Ottoman Empire and establishing a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Again, because of the Dreyfus affair. Eventually, France, having this new government coming in and deciding to basically support the position of the Dreyfusards, those who eventually were for the left, socialists and progressive people, decided to finally separate France from the Catholic Church in 1905. And then here's a 2005 stamp that remembers it. This shows France saying goodbye to the priest in the picture that was done in 1905. It means all schools were secularized. They were all given to the state to provide education, not the church. The Catholic Church was forbidden to participate in government, and so on. And of course, the Pope declared all of this to be a horrible, horrible sin, but it didn't stop him. So, Dreyfus retired almost, once he got his honors, he retired from the military. He went back to serve during World War I when the Germans invaded France. And he served honorably, as did his son and others. After the war again, then he retired. He lived till 1935, never publicly bitter, never complaining. Although what he did was he was very much a gentleman about the whole thing, and he was very true, believed in the army, and he believed in France. And to him, that was why his family had moved to France, because he was loyal to all this. Lived until 1935. One of his nieces was killed during World War II in one of the concentration camps. France, of course, anti-Semitism didn't die with the end of the Dreyfus affair. The anti-Dreyfusards were upset. They no longer controlled the government. They basically were there, but by the 30s and 40s, they came back into power in certain instances. Action Française especially was sort of a pro-Nazi group. And when France was defeated by Germany, the Germans occupied northern France and unoccupied France in the south, which we call Vichy France, cooperated in sending Jews, rounding up Jews, and sending them to the concentration camps. Among all the territories that the Germans occupied, the French cooperated the most with them. This is in fact a French badge for Jews, Juif, rather than Jude, which is the German one. The French put their own badge on their own Jews. So, here's a statue of Zola today. He's restored in honor at his place in French culture and society, and as a hero of the Republic for having stood up for the rights of just one person against the system. He should be honored for that, not just in France, but anywhere around the world because of this. He's a great person for following his quotes. I have a couple of them here. Live out loud. In other words, don't be silent, don't be quiet. Don't try to live under the radar. You have a life to live, make it count. So, the effects, long term. It was the culture war between those who wanted the old way of life and the old traditions in the Catholic Church versus those who are looking at the new France. That's the reason why truth became relative in this story. Who you were determined what you believed to be absolutely true, and then you fought to protect your truth, because if it wasn't true, then your whole life was a lie, as far as people were living this zero-sum world. If it isn't completely with what you agree with, then it must be wrong. We see this today among religious people who don't accept things like climate change or evolution. Who they can't, even though the facts are there, they just simply can't accept it. Belief and factual evidence are two different things, and you're entitled to believe what you want, but anyway, think about that. The media was demonstrated for the first time in a big way. Newspapers, which had been around, but they actually helped to transform this situation and cause people to rethink what had gone on. As I said, further secularization, ending of the role of the church in society. The French army eventually now came under the control of the government and couldn't do what it wanted to do anymore. And the Belle Epoque, racism and hatred were just as much below the surface then as they are today in the American century. They haven't gone away, though people like to tell you there's no racism in America. Just like that Mexican tried to tell me that one time. Nice guy, stayed at his house. I mean, it was like, but no, we don't have any racism. There are people that tell us today, they go on TV, they stand in front of Fox News cameras and say there's no racism in America. Well, good luck with that. Now, you think that it's over, but it's still not over. In the 1980s, President Mitterrand of France decided to have a statue of Dreyfus put in the same place where he was disgraced. The French army said, no, we will not have it there. So it was moved to a Jewish lawn where there were other monuments to French Jews. It was moved out of the central place that they wanted to put it. Then in 1995, just 20 years ago, approximately 21 years ago, no, excuse me, 95? Yeah, 21 years ago, a French military historian said, well, the general theory that people believe is that Dreyfus was innocent, but we know otherwise. He was fired for saying that. President Jacques Chirac was finally the French president who said in 2005, and he said, The government was wrong, the army was wrong, the church was wrong, and they apologized. And that was the first time the French government actually acknowledged that it was wrong. It took until 1995 for them to admit that Dreyfus, and for the military to finally accept that Dreyfus was not guilty. Because they believed still in they were under the control of citizens, but they wanted to keep believing their myths to themselves. It just shows you the power of belief, as well as the power of a relative power of facts, and so on. Here's another great Zola quote: "If you shut up truth and bury it underground, it will but grow." You can't go wrong with that one, and that's it.